of Hassan Hakimian. Thank you for coming. Really nice to have you. And formerly director of the former London Middle East Institute. So we go back a long way. Gilbert was the dynamo behind the academic study of Palestine, and his contributions continue till today. His book and other books, but also his beginning of the SOAS Palestine Studies series, which is published by Bloomsbury, which I currently co-edit with Professor Adam Haniyeh, who's coming back to SOAS as the new director of the SOAS Middle East Institute. But I just wanted to stop talking because I'd like to give the space to Gilbert. Gilbert is a well-known, foremost expert on the Middle East. But his book, The Gaza Catastrophe, is kind of very special, particularly to myself as a Palestinian, but also to many other people who are concerned about this, kind of disaster that is taking place in front of our eyes via television screens and so on. And he kind of, throughout since the beginning of the genocide up to now, he produced weekly columns that he published on his website, and that kind of took us back to the beginning and to trying to explain much more clearly what was happening. So it is a really important contribution, and I really encourage people to continue reading his articles that he publishes every week and other than that. But Gilbert Achcar needs no introduction. He's a well-known scholar of the Middle East. He has written a lot of books before this one, and he has published in more than 20 languages, including publications include The Clash of Barbarism, The Making of the New World Disorder, Perilous Power, The Middle East and U.S. Foreign Policy with Noam Chomsky, The Arabs and the Holocaust, The Arab-Israeli War of Narratives, The People Want, A Radical Exploration of the Arab Uprising, and The New Cold War, The United States, Russia, and China from Kosovo to Ukraine. And these are just some of the titles because he's produced much more. From the Gaza Catastrophe, I leave him to speak about it because I kind of was wondering about the title myself. And I was supposed to be a discussant in this, in this book launch, but things worked against that. And I think it is a very important way of describing what's happening. Gilbert does capture that from page 1 in his book. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Gilbert, who is still aligned to SOAS. He's an emeritus professor of development studies and international relations here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dina, and many thanks to all those who contributed to organizing this event, Gloria, Aki, Imran, those who work for the Middle East Institute. And thank you all for coming, and for coming despite the last-minute announcement, which probably dissuaded quite a lot of people of coming, and that's good because otherwise we would have had a real problem because 353 people had registered and it was closed, and then we had this flood. I mean, I have been in the 18 years I spent at SOAS. I can't remember any time a flood in the Brunei gallery, so it had to happen the day when we had to have this book launch. Anyway, so thank you all for coming here, and I'm very glad to see a lot of friends, colleagues, and all that. Thank you all for that. I'll give a presentation, as Dina said, and then we'll have time for some exchange. And of course, it's around the topic of the book, that I'll be focusing on issues that are in the book, but will be able in the discussion, of course, to go beyond, including, if you wish, a discussion of of the present situation. The first point I want to make is that the genocide in Gaza, the Gaza genocide, has become widely acknowledged, very widely acknowledged from a lot of sources. And just to be clear, to remind you of the definition of genocide, upon which those legal scholars and those organizations and the rest that affirm that what has been going on in Gaza is a genocide, base themselves. And it's mostly a part of the definition, the key sentence, which says acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part. So it's not a matter of number, but the intent to destroy a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Okay, that's the definition. And on the basis of this definition, people affirmed that this is the case in what happened in Gaza. And you remember that at the beginning you had a huge outrage about the use of this term. It was even labeled, various labels, including the ubiquitous accusation of anti-Semitism for any criticism of Israel. When South Africa started its action at the International Court of Justice, that was 2 months into the war. That was end of 2023. You remember the outrage, especially from Western sources, Western governments, and the rest, very much outrage at that. And we moved over this long period since then. From, I would say, the nature of the discussion has changed from those accusing vehemently all the people who acknowledge the genocide into what I would call today a denial of genocide. You know that every genocide has produced some form of denial. The best known is is Holocaust denial, but you have, for instance, even an official state denial of the Armenian genocide by the Turkish state, for instance. So every genocide has or finds a public for denial usually among the belonging to the state, nation, people that has perpetrated the genocide. And we are now clearly in that kind of discussion, and the more and more people are speaking of denial, of genocide denial, in describing those who still, until now, refuse to acknowledge the fact. So over all these, over the 2 years, and the continuous killing and destruction that has been happening in Gaza, you've had more and more people and organizations using the term, acknowledging the existence of it. At the end of year one, you had the 2 major human rights organizations that are Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Both of them produced reports with this acknowledgement of the genocide, and it went on like this into just a few months ago. 2 key human rights organizations in Israel, 2 Israeli human rights organizations, including the best known of them, B'Tselem, which published a report with the remarkable title, and very courageous title, I should say, for an Israeli organization, Our Genocide. That was the title of the report. Just think of figures like a recent poll in the United States showing that 40% of American Jews consider that Israel has committed a genocide. 40%. And actually, if you add 10% who say, I don't know, that makes almost one half, which is higher, very probably higher than the proportion of people who would acknowledge this genocide in the American population as a whole. So that all this tells you a lot about this. You have this increasing recognition. Recently, the Spanish Prime Minister used the term, affirmed that this is what's happening there. So that's the second EU government after the Irish one using the reference to a genocide. But still, you still have a continuous denial of most Europe by most European governments, including the government of this country. And what I want to stress in this regard is that that's not a semantic or dictionary debate or theoretical debate. It bears consequences, very clear consequences. If you acknowledge the genocidal character of the war that Israel has been waging in Gaza since October 23, well, you can't keep the kind of relations that they have with that state, including the military relations that this country, for instance, has, continues to have, major military relations, trade, and cooperation in military hardware. You have the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which part of which was supposed to be frozen recently, and then you had this this Trump peace plan, and then immediately the European Commission found there a pretext, I should say, to stop that. So this debate about genocide is important, not for history or general, but even for the immediate consequences of the debate. Now, those who continue denying the fact of genocide in Gaza focus the discussion no longer on the extent of damage or the killing, which is, we know the figures that are absolutely abhorrent, appalling figures, close to 70,000 direct deaths from bombing, to which you should add, according to some estimates by physicians early into that, at least 4 times this figure of indirect death, people dying because of the destruction of medical and health infrastructure in Gaza, the hunger, the organized hunger, very orchestrated hunger. That's part of this genocide. Actually, that's part of the killing, and the rest. So you would get, when it will be possible to draw a real balance sheet of this awful massacre, I'm quite sure that people will find out that more than 10% of the population was killed as a result of this war. But anyhow, the issue is, as I'm saying, it's not a matter of number. And as the definition that I read says, it's in whole or in part. So it's not a matter of for instance, putting the bar at the level of the Nazi genocide of European Jews, which is an almost total extermination, and then saying if it's anything below that is no genocide. No, it's not like that. And by the way, those same Western governments that deny the fact of genocide in Gaza were very much insisting on using the label for Bosnia, for instance, where both in absolute and relative terms, the massacre was quite less than what you have in Gaza. Now, About this issue of intent, well, I would say that actually the genocidal character of Israel's onslaught was clearly identifiable from the start, from the very start. The genocide, the intent, the genocidal intent was quite identifiable from the very start. And that's why you had very early on people using the term. I used that 3 days into the genocide. On 10 October, I described what had started as a genocidal war. That was in Arabic. My weekly column is in Arabic, but I translate every now and then some of the pieces that I publish in Arabic. Uh, More importantly, because more visibly in English this time, uh, 6 days into the war, after 7 October, so on the 13th of October, an Israeli scholar of the Holocaust and of genocide studies based in the US, Rassigal, published in Jewish Currents, it's not into some, in Jewish Currents in the US, he published an article titled A Textbook Case of Genocide. So that shows you, I mean, these early acknowledgements of what was going on are the proof that that intent was actually quite visible and from the start. And at various levels. The primary one is that it started with a blatant open violation of international humanitarian law, that is the law of war, if you want, the modern law of war. It started like this because, I mean, in the fact that from the start, the civilian population was targeted. You had the famous statement by the war minister, I won't call him defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, on 9 October. I mean, you surely know this the statement. It made a lot of noise at the time. He said, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly." And this was about shutting off, I mean, a whole territory with a whole civilian population without any distinction. And I'll get back to that in a second. So you had here already a blatant violation of the law of war, which, I mean, one pillar of which is the distinction between combatants and non-combatants, civilians or others, but non-combatant. Here you have the whole civilian population that is targeted and punished for what happened. And then in the stated goal, immediate goal of the war, which was the eradication of Hamas, right? Well, this is a genocidal goal. Why? First of all, it makes no distinction between the armed wing of the organization, which did October 7, and the rest of the organization. The armed wing, for those who don't know, is called the Azzeddin al-Qassam brigades, whereas Hamas is a mass organization of over 100,000 members who have been ruling the Gaza Strip since 2007 and developed, therefore, a whole civilian administration. So putting as a goal the eradication of Hamas, that is over 100,000 people who are part of this society, this Gazan society, by force, is in itself a genocidal goal. That's at the level of the stated, if you want, intent. And then the means. The means are also quite clear in this regard. Very early on, it was clear that Israel had started the destruction of the Gaza Strip. The violence, intensity of the bombing from the very beginning was absolutely terrible. And mind you, Gaza is one of the most densely populated territories on Earth. It's a you have a very high demographic density there, with 44% of children under 15. That's the official figures about Gaza. And yet, Israel started bombing, destroying, flattening out whole parts of that territory, and including the use of huge 1-ton and half-ton bombs, which are not designed to be used in urban settings because they have a terrible impact on civilians. I mean, you can't make any discrimination between the targets when you are throwing such a bomb on an urban concentration, a civilian urban concentration. And as a result of all that, the estimates are that 70% of those killed, and I'm speaking here just of those, the direct victims of the bombing, are children and women. And if I'm saying women, it's not, it's just because there are no women combatants in Hamas. I mean, the very nature of Hamas does not allow for women to be combatants. So already, even at that level, this is, a violation of all laws of war, and this is really very clearly intentional destruction of a major part, a big part of a population, with the obvious goal of pushing them to leave. It's a genocide. I mean, with the intention of going into an ethnic cleansing. Israel, of course, had no intent to destroy all of the Gazans, but the intent was very clear to destroy a big enough a proportion of them and destroy 80% of all lodgings there, that in a way that would be pushing them out of the territory. And that was very clear. Some documents were leaked very early on from the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence, showing, explaining that the best scenario would be to push them into Egyptian territory, and the rest. And then you have this, the same who want to defend the Israeli point of view on this and explain that it's not genocide. We explain to you, it's the most moral war that you've ever had, because we would warn them, leave this area, we're going to destroy it. Well, when you look at the size of the territory, this very small territory, and you know that not all population can leave at once within 24 hours any territory. This is quite hypocritical, and even more hypocritical when it is combined with the excuse of human shields, that Hamas is hiding behind human shields. Well, first of all, if we suppose, if you had some group who takes hostages, and the police come and shoot everybody, and they say, well, they were hiding behind human shields, you would have, a big outcry. So the excuse that they are using the civilians as human shields, and that's not why we are killing so many civilians, is just incredibly hypocritical. And even more so when you know that Hamas, the fighters, Azadin Qassam, don't need human shields. They have tunnels. They have more than the London Underground. They have a whole network of tunnels for them, not for the civilian population, and they are hiding there. And so that's why, if you take those figures of 70%, then you can be sure that even for the 30% of male adults that remain, the vast majority of them are not combatants. So no, I think the issue is and should be quite clear, and this outcome of genocide, is rooted in a history that makes it in some way something that could be foretold with regard to the circumstances that happened on October 7th. I described 7 October, I described it in the book as, I quote it, the most catastrophic miscalculation ever in the history of anti-colonial struggle. I think it was a huge miscalculation. And because I don't want to consider that anyone did that knowing what would happen, So I think it is a catastrophic miscalculation. But as I just said, described it, that it is a miscalculation that has to be placed in the history to which it belongs, which is not European history and the Holocaust. That was not the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, or this kind of description which aimed at putting what happened on October 7 in a historical sequence that would of course, makes it a kind of continuation of Nazism. This is absolutely not. I mean, you can be sure that had the oppressors of the Palestinians be Buddhist or, I don't know, Protestants or whatever religion, you would have had the same. I mean, the issue was not about Jews or not Jews. It's an issue about the colonial relation, colonial oppression that is perpetrated by Israel. And in the history of anti-colonial struggle, you've had other 7 Octobers. I described one in the book, which happened in Angola in 1961. And if you read the description, you will see that it's really the parallel between the two cases is striking. The same thing with also catastrophic consequences. And this said, whatever 7 October is, or whatever one thinks about 7 October, it was but a pretext. It has been seized as a pretext by the Israeli state and government to launch this onslaught that is absolutely out of proportion with 7 October. I mean, if you go back again to the law of war, you have the principle of proportionality. And so the retaliation, the right to self-defense, if you believe that the occupier has a right to self-defense against the right of the occupied to resist occupation, even if you believe that, then you would stick to the, at least if you want to be within the legal framework, proportionality. And very obviously from the very start, it was clear that it had nothing. By the way, everybody knows or hears about the 1,200 victims on the Israeli side of 7 October. You hear much less about the 1,600 Palestinians who died in this operation. That is, from the start, you had more Palestinian who died among those 5,000 to 6,000 who went through the breach in the fence. You had more people dying among them than Israelis. But the genocidal intent, as I said, was quite clear from the beginning, and now 2 years into it, even if after 1 month you could still believe that that Israel had the right and anything, no one can say that this is not a war crime that is going on. And as I said, and I explained, actually a genocide. Now, I think that my contention is that there was a genocidal potential in the very nature of the Israeli state, not because it is Jewish or whatever, just because it is colonial. Colonialism has a genocidal potential in itself. Like all colonial enterprises, and especially settler colonial enterprises, you have a genocidal potential. Just think of North America or Australasia. If you take two famous cases of settler colonialism, they were linked to genocides. Well, these were previous centuries. And the history of colonization until the 20th century at the very least is full of massacres. Just think of the fact that after the defeat of Nazism, the French state, led by those who had been fighting Nazism, perpetrated a huge massacre in Algeria, and then shortly after that in Madagascar, you had tens of thousands of people killed. So all the history of colonialism is full of genocidal massacres. Now, the more you get to modern times, the more it takes special kind of political forces for this genocidal potential to be realized, in the sense that the kind of racist views that were normal in the 19th century were no longer normal in the second half of the 20th century. So you've had a move in that regard. And here we come to another potential inherent to the state, the very nature of the state of Israel, which is the drift to the right. The colonial condition itself, and even more so when it is combined with a direct open occupation, not only ethnic cleansing that happened after 48, but you had adding to that a direct occupation of new territories in 1967. This creates conditions that will lead inevitably to a drift to the right. And this was said by a lot of critics of Zionism from the start. Jewish critics of Zionism emphasized this potential. And there you have it. If you take the 2-3 first decades of the Israeli state, you had a lot in Europe believing that this is some kind of beacon of socialism. That was the perception. You had a social democracy, the Zionist social democracy, the social democratic wing of the Zionist movement, ruling the state, founding the state, and then ruling the state for something like its first 3 decades. But then, since 1977, the far right of the Zionist movement came to power. Less than 30 years after the founding of the state, and 10 years after 67, the direct occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. The far right in 1977, the Likud party. The Likud is the far right of the Zionist movement. It relates to a tradition, the founder of which was an admirer of Mussolini and of Italian fascism, and these people won the election for the first time in 1977. And since then, out of the 48 years that elapsed since then, 35 years of Likud power. So Likud has become, by far, the dominant party in the Israeli state, and the former social democracy has shrunk to really a very small force within the Israeli state. And this drift continued. At some point, Ariel Sharon, who had been the commander of Israel's occupation of Lebanon, the man behind or linked to Sabra and Shatila, who had been prosecuted in Israel about those massacres, this man organized open provocation in September 2000 and served on it to win the election in 2001. then so you had this Ariel Sharon, and he launched the most brutal onslaught on the 1967 occupied territories since their occupation. They had never witnessed such an onslaught as that of 2002, ever since they had been occupied. Of course, that was before the present genocide in Gaza and also in the West Bank, where the conditions are extremely difficult. This drift to the right was also accompanied with a revision of the military doctrine of the Israeli army, which claimed in the past that it was very moral, and which designed after its fiasco in Lebanon, it had to leave Lebanon in the year 2000 after 18 years of occupation. They designed a new doctrine whereby they would destroy the civilian environment of the enemy to deter the enemy from any action in the future. So that was an open, again here, open violation stated as a military doctrine of the law of war. And that was practiced for the first time in 2006 in Lebanon, again, from where the Israeli army had left. I mean, it had to go out in 6 years before. In 2006, they took a kind of revenge on Hezbollah after they had crossed the border and kidnapped 2 soldiers. They destroyed, in large part, the areas, including urban concentrations around Beirut, where Hezbollah is the dominant force. And this drift to the far right, that is also what leads to Netanyahu coming to power after having fought a fight from the right against Sharon in Likud. He managed even to get Sharon out. And he launched this when Sharon decided, under the pressure of the army, to withdraw from Gaza. And you can see here that he was very much against the Israeli evacuation of Gaza in 2005. He came back to power in 2009 with Sharon out of Likud, and he himself at the head of Likud. And he remained in this position for 12 years, beating the record for Israel. Then came back at the end of 23 with a coalition with groups that have been described by an Israeli scholar of genocide, again, another one, in Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, as neo-Nazis. And the term is not an exaggeration. They are really neo-Nazis, very openly racist, very openly advocating ethnic cleansing, extremely right-wing and prone to violence, to the point that one of the 2 groups that are well known or designated as the far right, but they are the ultra right because the Likud is already far right, belongs to a tradition, the key group of which was banned in Israel itself in 1994 for terrorism, and in many Western countries. And that was the Kach group led by Kahana. And these guys were very clearly neo-Nazis, violent terrorists. I mean, they were banned in Israel itself for terrorism. And these are the people who are in this coalition with Netanyahu. And that's why, if you want, then you had the political conditions had assembled for the perpetration of this genocide, which, I repeat, was inscribed potentially inherent in the very structure, in the very nature of the colonial enterprise that Israel is the outcome of. Finally, a few words about what is the subtitle of this book, about Gaza as a watershed in world history. I think we are at a very alarming moment in world history, and we can all see, and now it's commonly acknowledged in the media and the rest, that the so-called rules-based international order, the liberal concept of that, which goes back to a real liberal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that kind of vision, the Atlantic Charter, and the translation of all that in post-Second World War institutions, the United Nations, first of all, of course, the International Court of Justice, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Genocide Convention, of which I quoted in 1948, the Geneva Conventions, so the new international humanitarian law, that is the law of war of 1949. So you have a whole set of institutions, but the rules-based order did not function most of this period because of the Cold War, which started very early on, actually, with the death of Roosevelt, his replacement by the rapidly anti-communist Truman, and you know the rest: Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and all the rest. So this was suspended. But then you had the end of the Cold War in 1990, let's say, with the reunification or the unification of Germany. And in that year, you had the then president, George Bush father, Bush one, proclaiming the New World Order. And that's a formula that made also, I mean, that became very famous at the time, the New World Order. And what is the New World Order? It's a world in which the rule of law will be dominant, and the weak will be helped against the strong. I mean, when you read the way he described this, is quite funny today to see it, and yet. And you had, again, a new layer of institutions. The International Criminal Court was created in that period, 1998 and the 90s. You had the UN General Assembly adopting the responsibility to protect, with the idea that beyond the principle of sovereignty, if we can't let governments massacre their own population, so if there is something the international community has a responsibility to protect. And you had people speaking about the cosmopolitan order now, not even international. And very quickly, all these illusions, one should say, were dismissed, dispelled. The 90s worked actually as a transition to a new Cold War. Dina mentioned the title of my previous book, which is The New Cold War, precisely. It's about how we moved from the old Cold War, if you want, to the new one, and how it evolved. But you can see how the rules were quickly violated by those who were speaking in their name. Already the Kosovo War in 1999 was done in circumventing the Security Council, the UN Security Council, which is the only allowed to legitimize a war according to the international law. But then in 2002, the United States withdraws from the International Criminal Court status, just 2 years after having joined it. 2 years after 2002, they withdraw. Why? Because they were preparing the invasion of Iraq, 2003. And this is an even more blatant and more serious violation, of course, of international law. But despite all that, you still had the illusion, because liberals, liberal Western forces could blame the conservatives, the Republicans, Bush, George W. Bush, for having done this. You had a democratic, so the liberal side in US politics, Democratic president boasting about his early opposition to the invasion of Iraq. It's Barack Obama. So you still had this illusion maintained and this pretense to stick to principles. And then you had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the liberal pretense reached a peak. So you had, again, Russia portrayed as the illiberal force, some kind of new version of what the Soviet Union was, and talk about democracy against authoritarianism and the rest. While at the same time, of course, the far right was moving up in Western countries. But that's the discourse was built there. Joe Biden, under whose watch Ukraine happened, started convening democracy summits. So the whole you had this revival of the whole ideology, attempts at revival. So the point is that Gaza put a final end to that. It's an accumulation. It's not Gaza alone, of course, but Gaza is a very significant event in that regard, because the double standard, the hypocrisy became absolutely blatant, absolutely obvious to anyone. And not only was the attitude different between Ukraine and Gaza, but Gaza is, as I also explained in the book, the first joint US-Israeli war ever. None of the wars waged by Israel before Gaza could be described as a joint. I mean, the United States supported, but at some point they pulled the brake on these wars. Here, in that case, you had full support of the genocidal character, with the provision of thousands of those one-ton bombs by the United States and other kind of terrible weapons, providing a cover for Israel to be able to do that while deterring neighbors or whoever else of intervening, and with all that, a full adoption of the stated goals of the war, to the point of rejecting the ceasefire, rejecting calls to ceasefire. All Western governments at some point were rejecting the very idea of ceasefire, calling any call for ceasefire, voting against any calls or any resolutions at the UN or anywhere else that were calling for an immediate ceasefire. So that this huge contradiction between the position on Ukraine, the International Criminal Court's stance on Putin, and the same court on Netanyahu, and the very different Western and US, but not only European also, attitudes on that. All this led to a final discredit of this the liberal pretense of being keen, on a rules-based international order. That was clearly pure and sheer hypocrisy. And this betrayal of liberal values and this discredit of these values fueled the rise of neo-fascism, of this wave in which we have been now for quite a few years, accelerated after the 2008 economic crisis, of the rise and the influx of refugees from Syria and elsewhere. So the increase in migration and political migration, all this has led to a rise in far-right forces, in neo-fascist forces, as I would describe them, and the betrayal of the so-called liberals of their own values, of their own principles, it actually fueled the rise of these neo-fascist forces. In a very direct way, Joe Biden fueled the rise of, or the second coming, if you could say, one could say, of Donald Trump. Even Kamala Harris acknowledged recently that his incapacity of showing any empathy to the Gazan people played a role in her defeat. And that is obvious. That was obvious that this had a major impact on her campaign. And of course, the fact that she didn't dare, at the very least, clearly take her distance from what Biden had been doing. Another and final element in this so-called liberal contribution to the rise of the far right is the whitewashing of the far right, especially of their anti-Semitism. And on this, Gaza has been very much used for that. Israel, this far-right government that you have in Israel, which is the most far-right, the government that is the most to the right in the world of any elected government. I'm not speaking of this dictatorships and things like that, because the comparison would be difficult. But for all cases of elections, there's no government that is more far right than the present one in Israel. And Israel has become a magnet to the global far right, organizing conferences with a representation of all far right forces. And very recently, you have probably heard of that, the invitation, not of Farage, but even worse, Tommy Robinson. Invited to Israel. And this far right, and that includes the German AfD, the Austrian FPÖ, and the rest. That includes far right groups that have roots in Nazism historically, is invited in Israel, and they have become the staunchest supporters of the Israeli state. And in fact, in the name of a joint repudiation of anti-Semitism by those anti-Semites, you had in France a demonstration with Marine Le Pen and the Socialist Party and Macron in the middle against anti-Semitism after 7 October, which was something really terrible to give any credit to the far right, the French far right, as being against anti-Semitism. But the point is, in the name of the repudiation of anti-Semitism, what you have is a conversion of its present-day equivalent, which is Islamophobia. And that is what they have in common. That's the terrain that you have in common between the Israeli government and the Western far-right forces, is this Muslim hatred that is their joint ideological weapon. So in that sense, well, Gaza has become, because of all that also, it has become a focal point in the global struggle against neo-fascism. And you can see the clashes, including in the academic sphere, on the issue of Gaza, and how in the United States, for instance, the persecution, the oppression of those students and faculty that stand with the Gazan people, and all this pushed by the neo-fascist administration of the present United States, that is, by the Trump administration. So all this is related to the, I would say, the world historical meaning of Gaza. Thank you very much.